This is from Mary Elizabeth Braddon's The Christmas Hirelings, Chapter 5. The Christmas custom at Penlyon Place was one in which Sir John's mind reduced Christmas Day to a penitential anniversary. On Christmas Day, the family dinner was at 5 o'clock instead of at 8, in order that the servants might enjoy their evening. Their evening? Echoed Sir John ruefully when the matter was put before him as a sacrifice which the head of a respectable British household was called upon to make. Their evening, forsooth! As if they had not 365 evenings in the year in which to take their ease and be merry from 9 to 11, but must needs throw our lives out of gear and make our evening wretched with the memory of a ridiculously early dinner, while they are uproarious over snapdragon or forfeits in the servants' hall. The whole thing is an absurdity. Absurd as it was, Sir John had been coaxed into submission, and now on this particular Christmas Day he was quite resigned to the 5 o'clock dinner, and was amused at the delight of the little hirelings who clapped their hands and jumped and chirped like 3 grasshoppers. "We're all going to have late dinner," they cried in a chorus of small silvery voices. "You poor things!" exclaimed Miss Hawberk. "Do you never have late dinner at home? Not even on Christmas Day?" "Never," answered the boy. "There isn't any late dinner. Mother dines with us very early, and then in the evening when the candles are lit, we all have tea, Mother and all of us, and jam sandwiches, and then I sit by the fire and learn my spelling while Mother puts Lassie and Moppet to bed." "He stops up last because he's the oldest," explained Moppet, who always addressed her small speeches to Sir John, "and we don't learn no spelling because we're too young, but I know most of Laddie's words," she added with sly triumph. "Laddie is very slow, and I'm rather quick." "Too quick, Moppet," said Mr. Danby, lifting the tiny creature in his arms, and looking at her with a touch of melancholy. "If my watch were to go as fast as that small brain of yours, I should be afraid the works would wear out." The children went for a walk on the cliffs with Miss Hawberk and the gentleman, whom they called Uncle Tom, and while they were strolling in the gray softness of a green Christmas, watching silvery gulls wheeling and chattering in the soft gray sky, or congregating on a ledge of rocks, and the black shags diving for fish, Sir John came across the hillocky turf and joined them. "Have you written all your letters?" asked Moppet severely. "As many as I cared to write, little one. The mild afternoon tempted me to a stroll." Moppet waited for no permission, but at once possessed herself of Sir John's forefinger and held on to his thick doeskin glove with a firm little grip. He could but wonder that such tiny fingers could hold him so tight. "And what does Moppet think of the sea?" he asked. "I like your sea better than our sea at home. There are such big, big, big rocks, and such a lot of black birds, and such a lot of white and gray birds. Uncle Tom showed us a rock just now that was all covered with birds. You couldn't see the rocks for the birds, and then he threw a stone and they all flew off screaming like human persons. It was so funny." "Then it seems you live by the sea when you were at home, Moppet?" "Always, except when it's the season, and then Mother lets her house to an English family, and we go to a farm where there are calves and pigs and ducks and chickens, and where we all wear wooden shoes and run about in the mud. It's lovely." Dinner at Penlyon Place on that particular Christmas Day was a grand function. The cook had surpassed herself in the preparation of plum pudding, mince pies, creams, jellies, and junket, stimulated to effort by the thought of the children. What was the use of making tarts or jellies for Sir John's table when the master of the house rarely touched anything of that kind, hardly looked at the best trifle or tipsy cake that could be offered to him? But there was some pleasure in cooking nice things for children, even if the children were to make themselves ill by eating too much or by mixing their puddings. Christmas came only once in the year, and no restraining consideration of health or the doctor should be allowed to spoil such a joyful season. So the creams and jellies and junket were placed upon the dinner table as if it had been a ball supper, in order that the children should see them, and loud and joyous were the childish exclamations at the appearance of the feast, at the clusters of tall candles in the old silver candelabra, the old-fashioned épergne with its crystal dishes of bonbons and sparkling fruits, crowned with a large basket-shaped dish of great purple grapes, the flowers, the dazzling white damask, and diamond-cut glass. There was nothing new or modish from Venice or Bohemia, no Liberty silk or fantastic ornamentation. Sir John Penlyon's dinner table was not in the movement. Indeed, it was arranged very much as it had been for his grandfather when the century was young. "I never saw a late dinner before," said Moppet, and then with a sigh of contentment she exclaimed, "It's very beautiful." The children were dressed for dinner, and there was nothing shabbily genteel or tawdrily fine in their raiment. Laddie wore a neat little black velvet suit, and the two little girls were in white cashmere frocks, which made them look more like dolls than ever. The crowning glory of the feast was the pudding. The room was darkened in the old-fashioned way, and the great plum pudding was brought in surrounded with flames, and all the company looked like ghosts in the blue, unearthly light, a ceremony repeated all over the land that day. In houses where there were children, rather boring for the grown-ups, but such a rapturous experience for the children, especially for the smallest child, who is just a little frightened perhaps at the entrance of the demon pudding, and hysterical with delight when the first shock is over. This pudding was saluted with a tremendous clapping of tiny hands, which sounded like the applause of an audience of fairies. The whole business was rapture, most of all when it was discovered that there were some new sixpences in the pudding. The excitement increased to fever heat when Mr. Danby found a sixpence in his portion, and exhibited an amount of pleasure which indicated an avaricious disposition, and quite shocked Moppet. "I suppose you'll give me your sixpence?" she said, stretching out a tiny palm in his direction. "You can't want it yourself." "Can't I?" ejaculated Mr. Danby. "I do want it very much. Sixpence is sixpence all the world over." "But a man of your age can't want sixpence," with grave remonstrance. "Can't he? Why, there are lots of things that sixpence will buy for a man my age. A cigar, for instance." "But you can't want that sixpence. You have always lots of money. I've seen you take out shillings, a handful of shillings, from your waistcoat pocket when you were paying for our brioches at the pastry cook's, or buying us toys in the Grand Rue. You can't want that sixpence." "Not to spend, Moppet. I shall keep it for luck. I shall bore a hole in it and wear it next my heart in memory of a Christmas dinner with you, your first late dinner." "I'm glad of that," said Moppet, greatly relieved. "I was afraid you were a miser after all." Laddie and Lassie greeted this speech with uproarious laughter. "A miser? Uncle Tom a miser? Why, you know he is always bringing us things. Mother has to be quite cross sometimes to prevent him spending too much money upon us," said Laddie. "Uncle Tom gave us silk stockings," explained Lassie. "They're real silk, not spun silk like most little girls have. They came in a letter from Wares and Swells. Wasn't that a funny letter? Mother told Uncle Tom he was dreadfully extravagant, but he only laughed. He is not the least little bit of a miser, not nearly such a miser as Moppet, who puts all her half-francs into a money-box that won't open, and then asks Mother for sows to spend." There was more than one sixpence in the pudding. Each of the children discovered a glittering new coin, and in Moppet's portion there were 2 sixpences. The stout and serious butler, helping the pudding on the carving table by the light of a single candle, was suspected of treasonable practices. If the pudding with its halo of blue flame were a glorious thing, how much more glorious was the Christmas tree in the great Tudor hall, the Christmas tree with innumerable tapers that were reflected in the bright armor of those dead and gone warriors whose prowess had helped to win victory at Agincourt, or whose strength had prolonged the bitter struggle at home in the Wars of the Roses. Miss Hawberk had sent round some little notes of invitation, swift and sudden as the fiery cross, and had assembled all the little ladies and gentlemen of the neighborhood, the pretty fair-haired girls from the rectory, and the children of the only 2 gentlefolks' families within an easy drive of Penlyon Place, and Mr. Nichols, the old bachelor doctor, had also been invited, perhaps in order to throw in a warning word occasionally when the revellers seemed inclined to overeat themselves. All the little girls had long hair, combed and brushed and crinkled to perfection, and they looked rather suspiciously at Lassie and Moppet's round-cropped heads, Sir John Penlyon had just seated himself on the great oaken settle in the chimney corner, after somewhat languidly performing his duty as host. Moppet walked straight to him, clambered on his knee, and nestled her head in his waistcoat, gazing up at him with very much the same dumb devotion he had seen in the topaz eyes of a favorite Clumber spaniel. "Why, Moppet, are you tired of your new little friends?" he asked kindly. "I don't like children. They are so silly," answered Moppet with decision. "I like you much better." "Do you really now? I wonder how much you like me, as well as you like junket?" "Oh, what a silly question! As if one could care for any nice thing to eat as well as one cares for a live person. Couldn't one? I believe there are little boys in Boscastle who are fonder of plum pudding than of all their relations. They must be horrid little boys. Laddie is greedy, but he is not so greedy as that. I shouldn't like to live in the same house with him if he were, for fear he should turn cannibal and eat you. What is a chamomile, and does it really eat people? Never mind, Moppet. There are none in our part of the world," said Sir John hastily, feeling that he had made a faux pas and might set Moppet dreaming of cannibals if he explained their nature and attributes. He had been warned by his friend Danby that Moppet was given to dreaming at nighttime of anything that had moved her wonder or her fear in the day, and that she would awaken from such dreams in a cold perspiration, with wild eyes and clenched hands. Her sleep had been haunted by goblins and made hideous by men who had sold their shadows, and by wolves who were hungry for little girls in red cloaks. It had been found perilous to tell her the old familiar fairy tales which most children have been told, and from which many children have suffered in the dim early years, before the restrictions of space and climate are understood, and wolves, bears, and lions located in their own peculiar latitudes. Sir John looked down at the little dark head, which was pressed so lovingly against his waistcoat, and at the long dark lashes that veiled the deep-set eyes. "And so you really like me?" said he. "I really love you, not so much as I love Mother, but very, very much. As much as Danby, as Uncle Tom, better than Uncle Tom, but please don't tell him. It might make him unhappy." "I dare say it would. Uncle Tom has a jealous disposition. He might shut you up in a brazen tower." Another faux pas. Moppet would be dreaming of brazen towers. Imagination, assisted by plum pudding, would run readily in tormenting visions. Happily, Moppet made no remark upon the tower. She was thinking deeply, and presently she looked up at Sir John with grave gray eyes and said, "I believe I love you better than Uncle Tom because you are a grander gentleman," she said musingly, "and because you have this beautiful big house. It is yours, isn't it? Your very, very own?" "My very, very own. And so you like my house, Moppet? And will you be sorry to go away?" "Oh no, because I shall be going to Mother." "Then you like your own home better than this big house?" "No, I don't. I should be very silly if I did. Home is a funny little house in a funny little sloping garden on the side of a hill. Uncle Tom says it is very healthy. There is a tiny salon and a tiny dining room and a dear little kitchen and 4 tiny bedrooms. It was a fisherman's cottage once, and then an English lady, an old lady, bought it and made new rooms and had it all made pretty, and then she died, and then Uncle Tom happened to see it and took it for Mother." "And was my little Moppet born there?" "No, I was born a long, long way off, up in the hills." "What hills?" "The Northwest Provinces. It's an awful long way off, but I can't tell you anything about it," added Moppet with a solemn shake of her cropped head, "for I was born before I can remember. Laddie says we all came over the sea, but we mustn't talk to Mother about that time, and Laddie's very stupid. He may have told me all wrong." "And doesn't Lassie remember coming home in the ship?" "She remembers a gentleman who gave her goodies." "But not the ship?" "No, not the ship. But she thinks there must have been a ship, for the wind blew very hard, and the gentleman went up and down as if he was in a swing. Laddie pretends to remember all the sailors' names, but I don't think he really can." "And the only house you can remember is the house on the hill? Where Mother is now? Yes, that's the only one, and I'm very fond of it. Are you fond of this house?" "Yes, Moppet. One is always fond of the house in which one was born. I was born here." Moppet looked up at him wonderingly. "Is that very surprising?" he asked, smiling down at her. "It seems rather surprising you should ever have been born," replied Moppet frankly. "You are so very old." "Yes, but one has to begin, you see, Moppet. It must have been a tremendously long time ago when you and Uncle Tom began." The explosion of a cracker startled Moppet from the meditative mood. It was the signal for the rifling of the tree. The crackers, the gold and silver and sapphire and ruby and emerald crackers were being distributed and were exploding in every direction before Moppet could run to the tree and hold up 2 tiny hands, crying excitedly, "Me, me, me!" It had been settled that the tree was not to be touched till the visitors had finished their tea. The house party, represented by Laddie and Lassie, had been fuming and fretting at the slowness with which the cakes and buns were being consumed. But now Uncle Tom, robed in a long maroon velvet dressing gown of Sir John's, with a black velvet cap on his head to represent a necromancer, had given the signal and was scattering crackers among the eager hands of dancing, leaping children, all crying, "Me, me!" Mr. Danby had taken a good deal of trouble to disguise himself. He had made himself a long beard of white horsehair, a beard which would have done for old Father Time himself, and which reached from Mr. Danby's ears to his waist. But the children hardly looked at him and expressed no astonishment at his appearance. All they cared for was to get the crackers and toys. "Me, me! Another cracker, please! Please, please give me one!" That was the cry, varied by smaller voices saying, "Give me a doll! Give me that pretty thing there!" pointing to a glittering gilt watch or to a fairy in star-spangled skirt. But the toys on the tree were little dainty things, more for ornament than use. The real toys were in the great washing basket, which 2 men brought into the hall, staggering under it. There were toys enough for everyone, and Mr. Danby distributed them with admirable judgment. He had even a packet for Miss Hawberk, tied with blue ribbon, out of which rolled a pair of long gloves such as young ladies love. Adela screamed at the sight of the gloves, just as the children screamed at their railway engines and stone bricks. When every child had received the most appropriate toy possible, and general contentment prevailed, the basket was not even half empty. Laddie peered into its depths curiously, hugging his clockwork steam engine under his arm, a green engine modeled upon those on the Southwestern Railway, which are said to be the finest in England. "There are lots more toys," he said to Mr. Danby, with that shrewd, insinuating look which marks childish greed. "Are we going to have those?" "No, Laddie, you have had your share. Those are for other children." "What children?" "You'll see, Laddie, all in good time." Laddie thought the only good time would be a time which would give him a share in those unopened parcels. For Moppet, the necromancer had a doll, a lovely fair-haired doll, with staring blue eyes, which occupied about 1/3 of her face. Nature had endowed the expensive doll with these enormous eyes. To Moppet's lively imagination, the doll, from the moment it was deposited in her arms, became a personage. "My darling, you must have a name," she murmured tenderly. "I shall call you Mary, after me." She ran to Sir John with her treasure. "Isn't she lovely?" she asked, and then, without waiting to be answered, "Her name is Mary." His wife's name. He started ever so slightly at the sound, so familiar long ago, so strange today. "Why Mary?" "She is called after me. I am her godmother. I shall have to teach her the catechism that Laddie has to learn." "And so you have an alias. I thought your name was Moppet," said Sir John, as she seated her doll on his knee and stood leaning against him, touching and examining that divine piece of waxwork, its lace petticoats, its blue silk shoes and open-work socks, a very paragon of dolls. "You knew my real name wasn't Moppet," she said. "Nobody was ever christened Moppet. It's only one of Mother's nonsense names, like Laddie and Lassie." "Oh, then you have all bettermost names for high days and holidays. Pray, what is Laddie's name? The same as yours." "Oh, he is John, is he?" "Yes, John, but not Sir John. He is not a baronet," making a great deal of the strange word which the servants had taught her as an attribute of the grave elderly gentleman to whom she had taken so kindly. "Will he be a baronet when he grows up?" "That's his own lookout. I take it he will have to win his baronetcy." "Win it? At cards?" "Why, what does my little Moppet know about cards?" "Lots. We play at speculation with Uncle Tom for nuts and vingt un, and he says that's almost as good as baccara." She stumbled over the word but finished it triumphantly. "I'm afraid Uncle Tom is a dangerous person to be with children." "He is. Mother says so. He takes us down to the plage and gives us donkey rides, and I once fell off," this with an air, "and grazed my elbow. The blood came through the sleeve of my overall. Lassie has never fallen off a donkey. Laddie has. They generally lie down with him. He kicks them too much. They will bear a good deal of kicking because their skins are so thick, but Laddie overdoes it. He is not a nice boy, not always," Moppet concluded musingly. She liked standing quietly at Sir John's knee with her doll, though the other children were playing post in a noisy circle round Mr. Danby and Adela on the other side of the hall. The many-colored tapers on the Christmas tree were all extinguished, but not burnt out, only half burnt, and the tree was still covered with golden balls and tiny oranges and glittering green and ruby fish, and fairy dolls nodding and trembling in space. "Wouldn't you like to go and play with the children over there, Moppet? They seem to be having a spirited game." "I don't care for games. I like to be here with you and Mary. You don't mind me here, do you?" "No, my dear. I think I can put up with you till your bedtime." That word bedtime is always a damper to juvenile spirits. In all those early years of life, the idea of bed is pretty much what the idea of Portland or Dartmoor is to the criminal classes. Children hear their elders talk of wanting to go to bed and wonder at such a perverted taste. There is always a sense of humiliation in that premature banishment. The grown-ups sit smiling and talking, bid goodnight condescendingly in a parenthesis, and one feels that their evening is only just beginning. The elder sister steps into a carriage, perhaps, and are whisked off to the opera or playhouse, while strong-armed nurse conducts the little ones to their nursery cots, to premature night and darkness that seem endless. It is a cruel inequality of fortune. "Isn't it a lovely tree?" Moppet inquired presently, her eyes wandering to that fairy-like conifer in the middle of the hall, with horizontal branches rising tier above tier, laden with things of beauty. "Yes, it is a fine specimen of the Arbor Toyensens." "There's only one thing that makes me sorry about it," said Moppet with a sigh. "And what may that be?" "Everybody hasn't got a tree." "Ah, you are a little socialist. You would like all children to have just as good as Christmas as you are having? Why shouldn't they? They're just as good as me, ain't they?" "I suppose they are, Moppet, only you happen to be here and they are somewhere else. But don't be downhearted, my pet. There are a great many Christmas trees blooming with toys and golden flowers tonight, and thousands of children dancing round them, just as happy as you and Lassie and Laddie." "Are there more children who have a Christmas tree than the children who haven't a Christmas tree?" asked Moppet, after a pause, with the child's love of statistics. "No, I am afraid there are more of the treeless children than of the fortunate ones." "Isn't that a pity? If it was only the naughty children who had to go without toys, it wouldn't matter," argued Moppet severely. "But I dare say there are naughty boys and girls getting toys and crackers, while there are poor good children without so much as a penny toy, only because their mothers haven't any money. Our mother isn't rich, but we've had a Christmas tree ever since I can remember, quite 2 Christmases. It was only a little tree, but such a pretty little tree. Uncle Tom sent us all the toys and ornaments and little colored candles in a big wooden box, and we all helped Mother to dress the tree. It was more fun than not knowing anything about it, and standing outside the door in the dark, and then coming in and being surprised. Our fun lasted ever so much longer, and we were surprised, after all, when we saw the trees with the candles all lighted. It wasn't a bit like the same tree. "And you wouldn't have known the dolls if you had met them in the street?" said Sir John, smiling at her grave earnestness. Bedtime, the inexorable summons, put an end to the conversation. The fair-haired rectory girls and the other little people were bidding good night, and the girls were being muffled in pink and blue hoods and cloaks, while the boys struggled manfully with the sleeves of their warm overcoats. A cold wind blew in from the vestibule when the outer door was opened, a nipping frosty wind. "There's a change in the weather," said Mr. Danby. "They've had snow at Brighton and Portsmouth. I shouldn't wonder if our green Christmas were to change to a white one." "Oh, how nice that would be!" cried Laddie, clapping his hands. "Would you like to be snowed up at Penlyon Place? Well, we don't often get snow in Cornwall, but perhaps we may be able to oblige you," said Sir John gaily.